Hi, everyone, and welcome to the launch of Safeguarding in Philanthropy, Safer Grant Making for Greater Impact, the most comprehensive study to date on how funders approach safeguarding throughout their grant cycle and which approaches achieve meaningful impact. I'm Steina Björgvinsdottir. I'm the Executive Director of Funders Safeguarding Collaborative. Launched in 2021, FSC for short is a network of over 115 funders who use their influence, resources, and reach to make people and organizations safer. The research report that we are presenting to you today helps close a crucial knowledge gap. We believe funders have a unique role in influencing and supporting safer organizational culture and practice. Yet until now, there's been limited empirical evidence about how safeguarding is being understood and operationalized in philanthropic practice, and which approaches are truly effective. Building on our previous study from 2021, FSC therefore commissioned Accountable Now to address this knowledge gap. The aim of the research was to better understand how funders currently approach safeguarding throughout the grant-making process, what challenges and successes they experience, and finally, how safeguarding practices can be strengthened to enhance impact and keep communities safe. Altogether, over 400 people contributed to this study, including grant makers, grant recipient organizations, and safeguarding sector professionals. I'm hoping that many of those who participated are with us here today for the launch. We're really grateful for the time you took to support us in this research. The outcome is a research report covering 7 different thematic sections, each looking at what the literature says, what current practices look like, and most importantly, what works. The report, however, is not the endpoint. Rather, it is intended to form the foundation of catalytic action, guiding the philanthropic sector toward evidence-based practice standards for funders that elevate practice, strengthen accountability, and ultimately make philanthropic work safer and grantee partners better supported. We'll hear more about the process during our time together today. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. Today's webinar is 60 minutes. During this time, we will hear from our research partner Accountable Now, as well as key funders and sector leaders who will share their insights and the implications of the research for how they are integrating safeguarding within their organizations and grant making. When we speak about safeguarding, the focus is often on what nonprofit organizations can do or should do to improve their practice. In today's webinar, however, we are shifting the focus to the responsibility that funders hold in keeping people safe. So we'll hear their thoughts and reactions to the feedback and the recommendations that nonprofit organizations and sector experts gave us through this research. Now, today we are using the Zoom webinar function. This means that you cannot see each other. You can only see our speakers. You can, however, use our Q&A function to ask questions throughout. Other participants will be able to answer, comment, or upvote your questions. So you should find that down here at the bottom in the Zoom menu. My colleague Karen from FSC and Bao Han from Accountable Now will be monitoring the chat and will do their best to answer your questions directly, as well as directing questions to our speakers towards the end of our webinar at the dedicated Q&A section. Please keep the discussions in the Q&A respectful and constructive. All right, I think that was it for the housekeeping. I'd now like to move to our opening remarks. We are really grateful to have with us today Douglas Griffiths, President of Oak Foundation. Douglas has the privilege of guiding the work of Oak Foundation, an innovative family foundation dedicated to building a safer, fairer, and more sustainable world. Child safeguarding has been a core priority for Oak for over a decade now, and they are also a proud founding member of FSC. Before joining Oak, Doug was a career diplomat promoting democracy, good governance, environmental protection, and inclusion across 4 continents. I will now hand over to Doug for some opening remarks. Doug, over to you.
So I do have to unmute.
Yes, you do.
And I have to unvideo. Okay, now we're here. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, and greetings from Geneva, Switzerland. I really like Steina's framing there of turning the focus on what philanthropy can do, because that's the focus of my brief remarks with you. It's such an honor to be with everyone today and to celebrate 5 years of the Funder Safeguarding Collaborative. I'm so impressed to see how far the collaborative has come in such a short time. And it's wonderful to see so many foundations and partners come together to support this important endeavor. So as Stana mentioned, we began our safeguarding journey in 2011 with a focus on child safeguarding. And this remains an organization-wide priority. While we do have a team member specifically responsible for leading our safeguarding work, we believe that it is a universal responsibility for everyone at Oak. And that means everyone at Oak, including our board members, participates in regular trainings. Our program officers who work directly with our grantee partners have a special responsibility and obligation for safeguarding. At first, they were often nervous to assume this responsibility, but with continued training, support, and clear communication from Oak leadership that safeguarding is an Oak-wide priority, they become quite expert in analyzing safeguarding practices at grantee partners and recommending when improvements or additional support are needed. As we believe that safeguarding is everyone's business and requires joint efforts and coordination, we're deeply committed to the work of the Funder Safeguarding Collaborative. We also believe that safeguarding is integral to effective philanthropy. Funders play a critical role in supporting organizations to strengthen the conditions in which they operate, and that responsibility extends to ensuring safety, dignity, and accountability are embedded in our grant making. Nonprofit organizations face many demands on their time. We want to make it easier for them to mainstream child safeguarding in all of their work. And the tools offered by the FSC are integral in those efforts. We believe that funders should both set safeguarding expectations and provide the tools so that our grantee partners can meet those standards. We've learned that we need to listen to our grantees and provide proportionate and contextual approaches that can support them in the best way possible. This is why the research being launched today is so timely. It provides insights into how philanthropy currently approaches safeguarding support, and I hope it will help the sector to move to more consistent and informed practice. We will soon hear from presenters around next steps, including how we can work together towards greater shared understanding and learning on safeguarding across the sector. The forthcoming safeguarding practice standards will offer us all a chance to align expectations, reduce unnecessary inconsistency, and reinforce safeguarding across philanthropy. We've already adapted our own standards and practices based on recommendations developed by the FSC. And we will carefully review the forthcoming standards to strengthen our own approaches to better support grantee partners in operating as child-safe organizations. Most of all, we're grateful for the work of the collaborative and all of our partners in the call for the joint commitment to strengthen our safeguarding practices. I wish you all great success in continuing this work. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you so much, Doug. We're incredibly grateful for Oak's dedication, leadership, and ongoing support for safeguarding. Thank you so much. Now we want to shift towards speaking about the research paper, and it is my pleasure to introduce Megan Kolnar, Executive Director of Accountable Now, a global nonprofit platform and membership network that helps civil society organizations strengthen accountability, transparency, and stakeholder responsiveness. Megan's provided leadership and supported the Accountable Now team in undertaking the research into funder safeguarding practices on behalf of FE. Now, in her career, Megan has substantial experience working with philanthropic organizations, including previous roles with Open Society Foundation and the Hunger Project. Now, Megan, As I mentioned in my intro, FSC commissioned this research in response to what we were hearing and seeing across the sector. Many funders committed to strengthening safeguarding, but limited shared understanding of what effective practice looks like in reality. We also know from previous research that harm can occur in any context and that a number of funders are already investing seriously in this work. The study was therefore designed to move beyond that intent and explore what actually works, particularly so that funders can focus their time and resources on approaches that are proven to be effective. Now, with that in mind, I'd love to hear from you some of the key findings and top line insights from the research.
Thanks, Dana. Well, as far as we can tell, this was the most extensive study ever done on funders and safeguarding practices, building on significant lessons and insights from the funder safeguarding collaborative work over the last 5 years. Our research, led by Elodie Legrand, included an extensive desk review of thousands of pages of funder policies, practices, requirements, as well as other white and gray literature and case studies. The research team gathered primary data from large-scale surveys, key informant interviews, and focus groups of funders, civil society organizations, and safeguarding specialists. While the surveys offered us a chance to quantify experience and practice across an incredible range of fields and sectors, the interviews and focus groups really allowed us to dig into the findings and their implications from a variety of perspectives. If I'm honest, we were really quite humbled by and incredibly grateful for the interest and contribution of so many thoughtful practitioners. Their enthusiasm and candor suggest that this research tapped into the pulse of something very important to the civil society sector as a whole today. And I have to say, today's participation rates kind of suggest the same. For Accountable Now, it was a great opportunity to be in dialogue with funders and their grantee partners to really understand what's working and what's not. So going back again to why this research was so important, the study builds on previous findings that if funders overstep their roles or impose overly rigid requirements, harm can be caused. Since funders and grantee organizations alike really care about safety and responsibility in their work and want to get it right, we wanted to meet this intention with clear findings on what's working and what's not, to help more funders identify and adopt practices that are effective, build safer organizations, and most importantly, do no harm. I know we'll dig in a bit further on some of the key findings as we continue our discussion, Stena, but if folks walk away with nothing else today, I'd like you to keep three terms in mind: flexibility, trust, and alignment. These concepts for funders to embrace are supported over and over again by our research, and we'll unpack them a bit further in today's discussion too.
Great, thank you. Now, you did mention that this is not the first study, and indeed, FSC conducted a study back in 2021 around the role of funders in safeguarding. And many of us on the call here today, of course, remember when safeguarding hit the headlines back in 2018. Now, at that point, there was a recognition of the importance of going beyond policy and procedures and working towards building a culture of safeguarding within organizations. However, funder safeguarding requirements are often viewed as a compliance issue, going back to that policy procedure focus. Can you tell us a bit about what the research said about this and how it can be made more effective?
Definitely. Well, and quickly as a short aside, I happened to be at a prominent funder organization when the safeguarding crisis came to light in 2018, and we were funding some of those organizations that were in the headlines. So balancing accountability, support, and contextual factors was a huge challenge that I got to experience firsthand as a funder. This experience that I brought helped us to see safeguarding responsibilities and failures from both the funder and implementer perspectives. So that was definitely helpful, at least for my part, in participating in the research and kind of the ongoing quest to understand this issue better. One of the first challenges with making safeguarding effective is agreeing on what exactly safeguarding is. I think as far as the research goes, we noticed some huge differences in how funders and grantees define the term, if they even use that word at all. In many contexts, like here in the United States, for example, the term isn't used widely. And in specific languages, for instance, Spanish and French, broader terms like protection or safety are much more common. But setting aside the language and term itself, we found a wide range of ways funders and their partners conceive of the concept. Some focus on specific groups, like children or adults who are particularly at risk of harm. Others focused on specific forms of harm, like protection from abuse and exploitation, but don't mention other types of harm or specific populations. Some go beyond populations served and types of harms by mentioning safeguarding staff, volunteers, and even the environment. And it's clear that whatever funder's definition of safeguarding includes often gets passed down as a requirement for grantees. In fact, we found many examples of organizations needing to have multiple copies of safeguarding policies to meet a range of nitpicky donor requests and thresholds, leaving a confusing mess of real practice and mechanisms internally. Based on the research, it's clear that safeguarding is most effective when it's holistic and flexible and focused on building a culture of accountability within organizations, rather than strictly requiring their grantee partners to follow a specific set of guidance or thresholds. That's not to say we should overlook the needs of specific populations, like children or refugees, whose specific needs and vulnerabilities demand clear practice and strategies. Every organization needs to think about the risks and vulnerabilities of those they specifically serve and work with. But what really makes the difference is building holistic safeguarding and accountability practice and a culture that keeps everyone safe and effectively addresses harms created. With this in mind, funders should be flexible and enable organizations to define what policies work for them, shifting from a funder compliance mentality to funder supported, effective cultural and institutional setup for this work is what really helps shift practice and enable organizations to fully embrace what effective safeguarding requires.
Yeah, absolutely. That really resonates. But I'm keen to know what emerged from the research in terms of the role of funders in supporting that shift from compliance to culture.
Yeah, the research has a range of suggestions on how funders can do this, Dinah, across the grant making cycle. Unsurprisingly, the research emphasizes that flexibility and openness are key. In fact, where possible, the research strongly suggests that a more relational, conversational approach to understand and support grantee safeguarding is the most effective. In other words, rather than having overly specific policy requirements, checkboxes, or thresholds, funders that engage in open dialogue with their partners to understand and support their safeguarding needs in ways defined by their partners and their stakeholders is most effective. But our research suggests that often funders only review and address safeguarding as part of due diligence, where a compliance or threshold mindset often reigns supreme. Unless incidents occur, and even sometimes when they do, many grantees report rarely hearing about safeguarding from their funders after the due diligence phase, further adding to the perception of safeguarding as a compliance protocol. To be clear, the research doesn't suggest throwing out your review of grantee safeguarding policies during due diligence, but more important than policy review is an ongoing dialogue that helps funders understand how current and prospective partners really live out their safeguarding policies and practices. These discussions provide useful indications for the funder about how safeguarding is owned and understood within the organization as a whole. But it's not just funders who benefit from this dialogue. In surveys and in follow-up interviews, grantee partners told us that this conversational approach, where funders ask questions about how safeguarding works in their organization, how it's adapted to their context or to their programs, are helpful. These discussions often unlock new ideas, identify risks and gaps, and even improve internal systems and how they're approaching safeguarding. Not to overly belabor the point here, Steina, but the research also suggests that this conversational tactic for exploring safeguarding between grantees and funders is particularly important when risks aren't static and as situations and contexts continue to evolve. And anyone paying even a little attention to the world today knows how quickly things are shifting. So when funders include discussions on safety as a part of their ongoing grant management practice, it demonstrates funder interest and commitment to how the work is being implemented and how they can support the organization to grow and evolve its safety and safeguarding work over time. We'll cover resourcing safeguarding in a little bit, but this ongoing dialogue also promotes a regular exchange and opportunity for partners to discuss budgets, challenges, and questions related to safeguarding that they may not bring up independently. But in order to do this, it's important that funders are creating an environment where partners have the opportunity and psychological safety to some extent to bring up issues, discuss gaps, share failures, and ask for support.
That's great. Thank you, Megan. I don't think we can bring up issues around trust and support too often. Now, you mentioned the importance of funders being aware of and supporting partners to address safeguarding risks. One of the key challenges, particularly given recent funding cuts across the sector, is the availability of and access to adequate resources to implement safeguarding well. What emerged from the research in this respect?
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, in line with past research, we found that safeguarding is not adequately resourced. 80% of grantees that were surveyed recommend that funders give more specific safeguarding funding, for instance, earmarking funds that are specifically designated for safeguarding. While this finding reaffirms other studies, we also found some interesting nuances. First, we found that UK funders are less likely to provide funding for safeguarding or cover the cost of technical support for partners in comparison to funders based elsewhere. This really surprised us, to say the least, given the legal and regulatory context in the UK and how important safeguarding is in due diligence processes and grant making protocols for UK funders. We also found a real disconnect between what resources funders are willing to allocate and what grantee partners think they can ask for. And when we say resources, we mean both financial and non-financial resourcing, including technical assistance, contacts, coaching, and peer learning. 75% of funders simply do not know or ask about their partners' unmet safeguarding needs. Many funders said that they'd be happy for applicants or partners to include a budget line for safeguarding or even make requests as the grant is ongoing for top-up support. But in conversation with grantees, we found that most were unaware that this was even a possibility and didn't ask for it as a result. Because of this, we see many grantee partners trying to cover safeguarding from their overhead costs, which, as we all know, is being squeezed from all directions and complicated by our sector's obsession with low overhead. As a former funder, I see this as a classic case of information and power asymmetry. Some funders are willing and just waiting to be asked, but their partners are completely unaware that they could make such requests. We also found that both funders and grantees don't really understand the true cost of safeguarding as a result of these piecemeal efforts, compliance-driven protocols, and a decades-long focus on minimizing overhead rates, where safeguarding costs are often housed. So we found a really clear need for funders to ask and discuss safeguarding costs with new and existing partners, as it helps both sides to think through what resources would actually be useful for funders to invest in and for their partners to receive. By making this process more explicit, both funders and grantees can build a better understanding of true costs and identify more accurate needs for support over time, which can help also ensure appropriate planning and resourcing in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note that safeguarding doesn't exist in isolation. It's simply a part of the organization's work. And so, of course, compound effects, etc. Now, the report also notes that funders can face resource constraints, although not financial. Could you unpack a little bit about how funders can better resource safeguarding within their own organizations?
Definitely. Resource constraints are not just restricted to partners, especially when we think beyond financial resources. While most funders covered in our research have an internal policy in place, many do not have dedicated staff with specific safeguarding expertise. Equally, while many provide some form of training to their grant makers, it's still far from consistent, particularly when it comes to tailoring training to the needs of different teams and types of grant making, types of partners. We think that this was really important because if funders want to do safeguarding well, the research emphasizes that staff need both the confidence and capacity to talk about safeguarding with partners, to understand and assess risks effectively, and to be able to advocate for the right resources and support within their own institutions. The research shows that this kind of mainstreaming of safeguarding practice, support, and understanding among its makers is effective, especially when combined with more dedicated and specialized expertise that can be called on as needed, whether internally or through advisors and partnerships, for instance, like with the Funder Safeguarding Collaborative.
Yeah, that's great. And although we could continue this conversation speaking about resourcing, it's incredibly important. I want to turn towards one of the key messages at the end of the report, which is that there needs to be greater alignment among funders on safeguarding. Can you tell us a bit more about why that is important?
Yeah, thanks, Dana. Coming back to those the three themes I noted in the opening, we've touched a bit on flexibility and context, as well as trust and relationships. And at last, we come to the hardest of them all, collective clarity and funder alignment. I've worked across a range of philanthropic and funding institutions as a major part of my work for more than a decade now. So I know that alignment is a high bar, especially in a moment where funders are re-strategizing or even facing their own attacks in some contexts. So before I share the good gospel of funder alignment, if alignment with peer funders or sector standards isn't possible, clear upfront expectations, definitions, and support offerings at the application stage will at least help prevent organizations wasting time applying if they don't meet the requirements. This step in and of itself can be a huge win. So I've already touched on the fact that currently organizations have to submit different things for different funders, and a group like we have gathered here today knows what a toll this takes on organizations from an administrative and reporting perspective. So I'm sure it's not a surprise to anyone here to hear that with greater alignment across funding institutions on how to approach and support effective safeguarding, your partners could save significant time and energy, which could be better dedicated to the actual business of safeguarding. Alignment of funders' expectations is also hugely important when incidents occur, something we haven't talked much about today. On the one hand, it's a real source of anxiety for organizations when an incident occurs. They fear that funding will be withdrawn and reduce incentives for honest reporting, something else we haven't really had the opportunity to get into today. But on the other hand, it's also a huge administrative burden when each funder wants different kinds of information and reports on the incidents in different formats and on different timelines. All this contributes to more confusion and anxiety when an incident occurs, rather than being able to focus holistically on the response and repairing the harm caused.
Absolutely. But how will this research specifically help funders achieve greater alignment then?
Yeah, so improving alignment was a key priority for this research from the outset, but the research also revealed that a more coherent set of practices and standards for funders is needed to help with this alignment. So building off the research, Accountable Now and FSC are very excited to be collaborating with a group of funders, civil society organizations, networks, and survivor-led organizations to co-create a practical set of standards or probably commitments that funders can take up and use to implement stronger safeguarding practices in their organizations and in their grant making. When applied at scale, we see a possibility of reducing unnecessary administrative burden on grantees while also collectively advancing safeguarding practice and culture across civil society and nonprofits. The co-creation group will be accompanied by CSO and funder reference groups to ensure that any future standards or commitments are realistic and practical to a diverse range of funders working with partners of all different shapes, sizes, and capacities. We really believe this has the potential to help reshape the way funders approach safeguarding so that it has a genuinely positive impact on keeping people safe.
Great, thanks, Megan. So if anyone attending today's webinar is interested in knowing more or getting involved, how can they express their interest?
Great. And I'm already seeing some excitement in the questions and chats. Good sign, Stana. In February, we'll be launching the co-creation process with a core group of funders, CSOs, and sector experts. AN and FSC will share information about this process and how the standards or commitment are evolving with the aim of launching the standards or commitments in September or October of this year. If you're interested in getting involved in any way, you can write to my colleague Bauhan or follow Accountable Now and the Funder Safeguarding Collaborative on our respective LinkedIn by scanning the QR codes on the screen.
Wonderful. Thank you, Megan, for giving us such a rich insight into the report. And just a huge thank you to the Accountable Now team who did a stellar job at pulling all of this rich information together. Now, if you want to dive a little deeper, you can access the report on our website right now. But we are going to now turn and speak to our panelists to hear their thoughts on the research and the significance that it has for their organizations and their grant-making practice. So I want to introduce our three panelists. So feel free to come on your cameras as and when you can. I'd first like to introduce Liz Winder, the Chief Operating Officer at Paul Hamlin Foundation. a UK-based funder working to ensure a just society in which everyone, especially young people, can realize their full potential. Liz has the responsibility for safeguarding within the senior leadership team and has supported the recent review of the Foundation's safeguarding policies and training, covering their work both in the UK and India. Liz has spent her career in the charity sector, and before joining Paul Hamlyn Foundation, she worked at Lloyds Bank Foundation and is currently the treasurer of Settle Support, a charity supporting care-experienced young people. Welcome, Liz. Our second panelist is Muna Webe. Muna works as a strategic advisor to philanthropists and CEOs of foundations and businesses. She is a trustee of Medical Aid for Palestinians, Global Dialogue, Global Fund for Children, and the Miles Coverdale Charitable Trust. Muna brings over 25 years of experience in the sector. She was previously the chief executive of STARS Foundation for 15 years, establishing its awards-based grant-making activities to grassroots organizations in over 67 countries. Across all of her roles, Muna has always been a committed advocate for effective safeguarding. She led the integration of safeguarding within the awards program at STARS and currently acts as the designated trustee for safeguarding at both Global Dialogue as well as at Global Fund for Children UK Trust. Welcome, Muna. And now I'd like to introduce Brad Duncan. Brad is the Chief Administrative Officer at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, also known as CIF, where he is responsible for global operations across legal compliance, external affairs, finance, and digital and technology solutions. His role encompasses safeguarding, where he works closely with CIF's Global Director of Compliance and as well as their safeguarding trustee. In his role, he has fostered the integration and mainstreaming of safeguarding across CIF's mission to improve the lives of children and mitigate climate change. Brad is also a qualified solicitor in both Australia and England and Wales, with over 25 years of experience. Now, we're going to move on to the questions that we have for our panel. Please note that this is the time that you can ask the panelists questions through the Q&A function. This includes questions for Megan, and our team will collate and consolidate these. Now, Liz, I'm going to turn to you first. As a large funder, Paul Hamlyn Foundation inevitably receives funding requests from a diverse range of organizations, some with strong safeguarding, but I imagine also others that might have weaknesses or gaps in their safeguarding. Now, from the research, we heard that funders can play an important role in supporting safer practice, but sadly, opportunities are often missed. Now, as a leader in this area, how do you see the role of funders in strengthening safeguarding, and how can we bring other funders with us on this journey?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for inviting me. It's been so interesting just to hear a little bit more about the report this afternoon. And I'm not sure it's weird, isn't it, being considered as a leader in the area. I don't know that we would necessarily put ourselves in that bucket, but we're certainly putting the effort in. And across the whole team at Paul Hamlyn Foundation, I think I could say that there is a real culture of learning and improvement. And I think that's probably key actually to this. One of the strongest messages that I thought came out of the FSC research is that while funders can play a role in strengthening safeguarding across the sector, we sometimes fall short. And I think that's not because of a lack of intention, but because we sometimes just rely too heavily on compliance-driven approaches, often for good reason, I'm sure. So I agree, funders do have a key role to play in promoting safer practice. And I think that starts with shaping our own culture, actually, and creating a relationship with applicants and then grant holders, which fosters openness and curiosity. The FSC report shows that most funders check whether grant applicants have safeguarding policies, and obviously that's a good starting point, but then far fewer explore whether or how these policies work in practice. And at Paul Hamlyn Foundation, I guess our main learning is that safeguarding It only really comes alive when it's embedded in the everyday, in behaviour, in power dynamics, in leadership decisions and organisational norms. And I think that that is something that the grants team here are quite attuned to and make a real effort to create conversations with grant applicants and then grant holders who feel the conversation feels comfortable and professionally curious so that they can understand more about the safeguarding practice rather than just what a policy might say. And that's not about catching people out, but learning what works and actually then sharing that practice elsewhere, to build a kind of stronger ecosystem, I guess. And so whilst we have quite strong training and policy and those guardrails in place, I think all that does is just create like a safe space to create that culture and have those conversations. And so I think for funders more widely, there's something much broader here about wider practice and safeguarding just being a component of that. So yeah. Secondly, we know at PHF that we can intentionally or unintentionally actually shape a system and for better or for worse. And I'm sure most funders know that too. And the research makes clear that funding practices significantly influence safeguarding behaviour. And actually, it's just good to, as a funder, good to be reminded of that fact that inconsistent requirements across funders create administrative burden and confusion. And that should be obvious, shouldn't it? But sometimes I think it's easy to be so busy trying to improve your own practice that you forget to look outwards and upwards and think about how you might work with others for the broader benefit of the sector. So that was super helpful, actually. In the defence of funders, I think it can be quite a complex landscape. And when I think about some of the areas which we fund at Paul Hamlyn Foundation, it would be quite challenging to develop a set of completely consistent requirements across all our own funds, never mind with other funders. So, for example, we have a fund called the Ideas and Pioneers Fund, which funds individuals and small groups and real kind of startup groups who have a good idea. They might just have an idea or a concept which they'd like to develop in pursuit of social change. So safeguarding policies and practice for those applicants is often it's newly developed or it's just emerging or actually just in a period of flux, and it's changing depending on how the applicant shapes their work during the course of the grant. Contrast that with some of our work in schools who have very clear and robust safeguarding practice, or our work in India where culture and practice and resources are different once again. I think it's pretty challenging to create consistency in terms of requirements. But the golden thread between all of those funds is curiosity and an open culture. And I'd like to think that that is where funders could focus their collective effort in creating responsive and thoughtful processes which genuinely consider the context that they're funding in. And finally, thirdly, when I think about the role of funders in strengthening safeguarding and bringing others on the journey, I think we need to remind ourselves that our role as funder is we're not auditors, we're not regulators, we're not statutory bodies. We're primarily enablers of others, actually, and the brilliant work that they do. And so, yes, we need to meet our own governance requirements, but if we want that to be meaningful, we must create enabling conditions. And for us, I think that probably means having really good three-way support between our board, the people that are making the grant decisions, and the staff team, so that the board are really with us with the approach that we're taking. And that's always going to be challenging with a busy board, but we need to put the effort in there. We need to resource safeguarding ourselves. And that was really interesting to hear more about funders funding safeguarding costs in others. And actually, we were having a conversation about that this morning here about how, so we do that, but could we more explicitly tell people that so that people feel enabled to make sure that they're putting in the resource that they need, the people that we fund. But so we need to resource that ourselves as well as those we fund with a really well-trained team who have really good contextualized experience. So that, I feel like that's really important. And then finally, we need to just normalise those safeguarding conversations, both at the grant assessment stage and during the course of the grant. And for those that we fund, to be really clear that we welcome that ongoing dialogue, and we want that. So for grant managers, asking about safeguarding in a really thoughtful way and genuinely being interested in the answer, knowing that the answer, it might not always be exactly what they expect, and that being okay, is probably the most key part of our process. So yeah, I think that was all I was going to say. Hopefully that was some use. Ultimately, we're really keen to work and learn from others in this space, because I think if we get it right, there's just benefits much more widely, not just to safeguarding, but more wider benefits to the general philanthropic ecosystem.
Great. Thank you, Liz. I really appreciate that. The intent to learn and adapt towards safer practice while, as you say, supporting and enabling your partners to carry their work out safely. Now, Mona, I want to turn to you now. One of the key findings from the report was that leadership and board engagement is really imperative for effective safeguarding. Grantee partners told us in the research that it's helpful when funders ask about their board's engagement, as it pushes safeguarding up that priority list. Now, the same principle applies within funder organizations, and yet getting boards to view safeguarding as a priority can be challenging. Now, just drawing on your experience as a designated safeguarding trustee on funder boards, can you tell us what you've learned about ensuring safeguarding is both prioritized as well as adequately resourced, as Liz just mentioned, within the foundation?
Sure. Thank you, Stena. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this important conversation, and congratulations on a fantastic report. I'm going to do my bit in threes, if that's okay. I'll share three quick reflections, and then I'll share three action steps for people to hopefully take away if they find them useful. My first reflection, and it's something that's come up already, is that safeguarding is a key part of an organization's mission and culture. So in my experience, board members first engage with safeguarding, usually because it's a compliance requirement or because it's a fear around reputational risk, and that's either the board member's reputation or the organization's reputation. But really, safeguarding is a fundamental component of what a funder does and of why we exist and the work that we're supporting. And it's just as much about our own team and our own organization as well, and our practices, because we have a duty of care towards our team members, we have a duty of care towards our volunteers, we have a duty of care towards our board members. So it really isn't just about ticking boxes for compliance and risk purposes. And so likewise with our grantee partners, we should approach safeguarding in exactly the same way. We're supporting their efforts to make this a core part of their mission and their culture as an organization. And it should not be about trying to push them to comply with our requirements as a funder, which is something that obviously we often do, unfortunately. The second reflection is the importance of understanding what resources are needed for safeguarding. All of these things have obviously come up in the conversations already, but in terms of resources, it's both budget and time, and it will vary by organisation, and it will depend on their context and the work that they're doing. And so as a safeguarding trustee, it's really important that I'm listening to our designated safeguarding lead within the organisation, that I'm understanding what resources they feel the organisation needs to keep people safe, and that I'm conveying that and sharing that with the board and supporting that with the board. And in some organisations, you'll see safeguarding merged, for example, with HR, you'll see it merged with programs, and that might be sufficient for that particular organisation. But in others, you'll have a designated safeguarding person full-time. You might even have a team of people full-time, depending on the work that the organisation does. So resource really does depend on the context of the work and the organisation. I'll keep coming back to this as you will see. And likewise, when you're developing a new fund or a new programme, as a safeguarding trustee, our role is to question the team to make sure that they've thought about what safeguarding requirements are needed up front, so it's built into the programme. And so that helps, I think, reduce the risk of being sort of reactive when something might go wrong, because things do go wrong. So if you've thought about the requirements up front and you've built that into the program design from the very outset, then that's a great buffer and a great support as you're running your new programs. And my third reflection, and this is something Liz touched on, is understanding our power and using it well. So as she said, as board members and as funders, we have a huge amount of power, and there are power dynamics at play throughout the sort of the value chain, if you like. So from funder to grantee, from board to team, from individual board member to individual team member, and then from grantees to their service users as well. And so we have the power to shape outcomes. We have the power to shape practices within our own organization, but also within our grantee partners. And so what I found can happen at times is that board members can unfortunately panic or have a knee-jerk reaction when something goes wrong. And that can potentially cause more harm if we're not thinking things through carefully and slowly. And so as we're making decisions, which often happen in the boardroom, very importance around working really closely with our team to center survivors above all else. So it's that survivor who has to be at the center of that discussion, because at the end of the day, safeguarding is first and foremost about people. It's their safety, it's their well-being, and that should be the thing that guides decision making at all moments. In terms of my 3 action steps to take away, when I was first invited on the panel, the first thought I had was that everybody wants safeguarding done well, but everyone's afraid to go near it. And in my experience, most people just sort of shrink back and go, oh, I'm not sure I want to be involved in this. And so this is just a sort of reminder to safeguarding trustees that, you know, our role is to remind the board it's about asking the right questions. It's not about knowing all the answers. It's about ensuring adequate resources are in place, so we're being proactive instead of reactive. And it's thinking about safeguarding as a fundamental component of an organization's mission and culture. The second thing that I found really helpful is to ensure there are regular board updates at board meetings around safeguarding. So you're keeping it, you know, top of mind. It's always in the conversation. It's always reported on, reflected on, discussed, and training, as Doug mentioned right at the outset, also really important, at least once a year, if not more often, if possible. And in training, I found the most effective way of doing that is sharing real cases and having people actually discuss the case, what they would do, how they would react, what, you know, steps they can take, because that really sort of brings it to life in a way that just standard training, I think, probably doesn't do. And lastly, and again, this has been raised already, but consider what's needed to support safeguarding within any new programs that the funder may be launching, but also asking grantees what they need to keep people safe and to do their work safely, and thinking about how that can be planned into the design of any new program. And that can be, you know, put into, for example, when they're, you know, putting together their budgets and they're thinking about their whole program and how they want to respond to a new fund. They're thinking about safeguarding, they're discussing it as a team, they're raising it with their board, and they're including it in their budget so that it's given the prominence and the importance that it deserves. And the last thing I would say, and my last reflection is that context is everything. And so trying to do the one size fits all for everyone, I don't think is a possibility. So it's really about understanding the context of every organization that you're working with. That's it from me.
Great. Thank you so much, Mona. Incredibly powerful. I really appreciate the action steps and just the demystifying of safeguarding and unpacking power and carving out that all-important time during board meetings that are indeed action-packed. That really resonates. I now want to turn to you, Brad. In the research, we repeatedly heard that differences in funder requirements puts pressure on grantees as they have to contort their approach or duplicate efforts to meet individual funder demands. Now, the hope is obviously that creating safeguarding practice standards or commitments, working title, for the philanthropic sector will promote greater alignment, but we also recognize that each funder has their own processes and ways of working. So I'd like to know, what benefits do you see in aligning SIF's approach with best practice standards, and what considerations would you have for us as we embark on this process?
Thanks, Dina. Always difficult going last in these contexts because so much very good points, so many very good points have already been made by Liz and Muna. So thanks for those. I particularly agree, Muna, with your discussion around engaging the board. I think at SIF, when we started engaging our board with more regular information about safeguarding and safeguarding incidents, I think the initial reaction was somewhat shock at understanding, at seeing what was going on, but that very quickly turned into an acceptance and an embracing of our safeguarding and the importance of it. In terms of the benefits to grantees and to the good work that all the organizations on this call and in addition to that are doing, I think there's clear ones about the headline about raising the profile of safeguarding for all the reasons we've talked about. Having that coherent set of standards that people abide by or implement in their work, I think creates momentum and creates a strap line, if you like, that people can then get behind. And it's worthwhile just remembering that certainly from the UK perspective, safeguarding is the number one risk to charitable organizations as identified by the Charity Commission. And so we can't understate how important it is to create that mutual alignment and drive on safeguarding. I think there's, of course, the efficiencies that come from having aligned standards. I mean, at SIF, it's something that's very important to us at the moment and high on the agenda, creating efficiencies within our ecosystem and our grantee partners to reduce the burden for all the reasons that you at the beginning, Stena, mentioned, given the squeeze on philanthropy and charity at the moment. As at SIF, as an aside, we're currently working on a project across due diligence as a whole to try and create a open due diligence platform that grantees can use to upload due diligence information that can be used by funders rather than having separate individual requirements coming in from different organizations. That in itself, that's presenting challenges for the reasons you've referred to. Different organizations have different requirements, so it's about building a mechanism and it's about building standards that are workable for the vast majority of the requirements, but then build in the flexibility to include your own requirements. And as one of the world's largest children's charities, we obviously have very specific requirements around working with children and what that entails. And we will always need the flexibility, given our board's interest and focus on it, to do maybe a little bit extra here and there. But if we can get 90% of the way to creating efficiencies, then that will be good. I think the last thing I just wanted to point out, and it's something that's not being touched on really yet, is at SIF, our journey for safeguarding and in relation to safeguarding has really evolved over the course of the last couple of years into, and it has been referred to generally about integrating things into program design, I think Muna said. But the way our board is approaching it now is very much not as a matter of protecting individuals for all the good reasons that is done, but also with an eye on the impact of our programs and the programs of our partners as well. One example I can give, and we talk about it often at SIF, is that we had a safeguarding incident in a program that involved young girls in Africa, in a particular country in Africa, going to pharmacies to be to receive an assessment and to receive treatments. There was some safeguarding incidents in that, some assaults in those contexts. And in discussing it with our board, the board made the very good point that actually not only is that a bad thing, a very bad thing for the individuals involved, but if that individual then tells someone else about the bad experience they've had, then they're unlikely to go and access those services. And that's going to undermine our program. It's going to undermine our funding. It's going to undermine the funding and the work of our grantee partners, etc. So I think one of the benefits of having these standards and developing these standards as an ecosystem of funders and of grantees is yes, the greater focus on protection of the individual, creating that strapline, creating that drive behind safeguarding. But if done right, and if done in a way that meets the needs of all organizations and is implemented in a way that sees prevention as the main goal and impact of our programs as a main goal, then we can have more success as civil society in the sorts of areas that we're working in. Obviously, I'm thinking about the children's area, and that's where we've seen these examples. But we don't limit our safeguarding work, and nor do I think should anyone limit their work to children or vulnerable adults or anything like that. It should be in respect of everyone who we work with, everyone who we fund, and all the organizations we work with, so that we can continue to have that impact, drive further impact, and protect people so that they can have a voice, and can have a voice in a way that creates impact and creates change in the way that we want to create it. So I see that as a real benefit of having these standards. And at CIF, we're very pleased to have been able to support the FSC for the last couple of years, and we hope to continue doing that and being involved in the setting of these standards, so that we can have all the sorts of impact and good outcomes that people on this panel and otherwise have talked about. Thanks, Dana.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad. And thank you for providing an incredibly powerful live example of why we can't achieve our set impact without safety. We do indeed hope to build momentum and drive, and we're incredibly grateful in having CIF's backing throughout all of this. So we are almost at time. And I can see that both my colleague Karen and Bauhan have been busy answering your questions in the chat. So let me just double check that we are good. Let's see. Maybe just if we could have one volunteer that would like to answer one of the questions here before we end today, in kind of 1 or 2 words. I can see a question saying, safeguarding is always about people. So how, as funders, do we keep people at the center of everything we do and not lose sight of the human? That's not an easy one, but any thoughts that come to mind from our panel before we close?
I think so. I'll jump in, Sina. I think what we do when we report to our board on incidents, and as I said, we do that very regularly. I think, as Muna referred to, it's a great way to, bring safeguarding to the center of an organization and raise it up the agenda. But our reporting is always very focused on the circumstances of the individual, and the first thing we refer to in our incident reports to the board is, where is the person affected? Where are they now? What's happening to them? How are they being supported? And our board is interested in that. That's the first thing they ask about now that we've sort of taken that approach. And so I would say, very practically, when you're reporting on issues or talking about safeguarding incidents, be they within your organization or elsewhere, you're using examples, I would refer to, where is the individual now? How are they being protected? Are they with their family? If they don't have a family, are they within an appropriate support network? Are they being protected and given the care that they need? And I think if you continually do that as the first thing you refer to in your reporting, then it quickly becomes standard practice, and that gets your human-centered approach, or helps with it.
Great, thank you so much. Muna, one word from you?
Yeah, I was going to say the same, but also when you're thinking about training, to frame it around the individuals and survivors, because a lot of time training it starts off being about reputational risk for the organization and compliance. And if you frame it, first of all, about keeping people safe and reminding people that that is ultimately the most important thing, and that's why we're here. So yeah, that's the only other thing I would add.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. Thank you. Huge thank you to all of our speakers for sharing so generously of their knowledge and experience today. Thank you to all of you who engaged, shared questions and reflections in the chat. Now, as you've heard us say several times today, this report is not the end point. It is an invitation for funders to reflect on their current practice, to learn from what works, and to contribute to the development of the safeguarding practice standards for funders. Now, as Megan mentioned, the work is kicking off. We look forward to keeping you informed about the progress made and, of course, sharing updates throughout the year. And a final reminder, the full research report as well as a shorter summary report is available on our website if you'd like to head there to have a read right now. The recording of the webinar will also be available on the website, fundersafeguardingcollaborative.org. If you have any questions for myself or the team or the panelists, please reach out through the email address that my colleagues are placing in the chat right now. You can also reach out via our website. So on behalf of Funder Safeguarding Collaborative, thank you for your time, your engagement, and your commitment to safeguarding and safer philanthropy. We wish you a good rest of your day.